Nós somos escravos dos genes, ao que tudo indica. Calvície, altura, obesidade. A genética é implacável determinando tudo isso. Será que somos simples combinações de características dos nossos antepassados? Ou existe espaço para grandes mudanças feitas por nós mesmos? No programa de hoje, vamos conversar com o jornalista David Schenck. Em seu último livro, ele defende a teoria de que nem tudo está escrito nos genes. O nosso DNA, segundo ele, não é capaz de determinar o nosso intelecto. O que nos separa dos gênios? A noção de que criatividade é 1% de inspiração e 99% de transpiração pode ser real? Uma psicóloga adverte: em muitos sistemas de educação, os mais capazes são os menos incentivados. O Espaço Aberto Ciência e Tecnologia está só começando.
Quando vemos um músico como Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart em ação, reconhecemos na hora: estamos diante de um gênio. Aos 5 anos, o menino austríaco já era um virtuoso no cravo e no violino e começou a compor as primeiras peças. Até o fim da vida, presenteou o mundo com óperas como Bodas de Fígaro e Dom Giovanni. E o que dizer desses passes de pura magia eternizados por um dos maiores gênios do nosso futebol? Será que essa habilidade com a bola veio escrita nos genes de Pelé? Diante do brilho dessas mentes, nós, meros mortais, achamos que a genialidade é algo inalcançável, reservado apenas para quem nasceu com genes especiais. A epigenética diz exatamente o contrário e avisa que para ser gênio é preciso trabalhar duro, sem ter medo do fracasso. O jornalista David Schenck compilou e traduziu para a linguagem leiga essas pesquisas no livro O Gênio em Todos Nós e garante que qualquer um pode chegar lá, mas o caminho é longo.
The old way of thinking was that the genes had a certain amount of, had information on a certain amount of intelligence and talent. So genes are going to make you, this smart and this tall and this fast and things like that. And it turns out that's really not how genes work. Different genes do influence different levels of intelligence, but only as in an interactive way. Genes are more like switches and buttons that get turned on and off and up and down by the environment we live in. It's called gene expression or epigenetics. So genes matter, but the environment matters in concert with the genes. And fundamentally, the genius in all of us, the reason I titled the book, is not that we are all geniuses, but that we are designed to adapt to the environments around us. We're designed to answer to the demands that we put on ourselves.
Isso explicaria, por exemplo, por que Mozart se tornou um prodígio e a irmã mais velha não conseguiu escrever o nome na história da música.
We tend to think of Mozart as this person who was born a genius because he was supposedly doing all these amazing things, very early on. And how could it be except that he was just born this, this musical prodigy? First was a mediocre composer, and then a little better, and then a little better than that, and over time became this extraordinary composer that we know. Now, why did his sister not become, this thing? Well, it was a cultural reason. The women at that time simply didn't become professional composers or performers.
Some people say that he was almost obsessed by the idea of
Right.
become a genius.
Right.
There are limits, don't?
You don't get great without being obsessed. I'm going to stumble. I'm going to have failures. I'm going to have disappointments. I'm going to start out mediocre, but I like this. I want to do better at this. I want to be better at this. And when I fail, I'm going to try to figure out why I failed and what it is, what skills I don't yet have yet, and look into the failure. This is actually the big difference between super achievers and ordinary achievers, is that ordinary achievers, mediocre, performers, they stumble at something and they don't like that feeling and they say, oh, I'm not good at that. I don't have that innate skill. I'm going to try something else. The superachievers, when they stumble, they say, I don't like that feeling, but I want to fix that. I want to learn why I stumbled. And they turn into the failure, and they actually make failure their friend. They don't enjoy failure, but they make it their friend and their opportunity, and they turn it, and they never ever give up at what they want to achieve.
Mas atenção, quem quer ter sucesso precisa aprender a lidar com o fracasso, uma lição que até os atletas mais consagrados aprendem na prática. O difícil é não desanimar, e os pais podem e devem ajudar nessa caminhada.
The best signal a parent can send is, we expect a lot of you. We love you, and we're always going to love you no matter what you do, but we expect you to try hard. And when you have a problem, we expect you to try to figure out how to solve that problem. And we're going to be there to support you as long as you're a child, until you become an adult, to learn how to solve problems, and that over time, you can do that. We believe in your ability over time to become better.
Nem sempre os pais conseguem passar para os filhos essa ambição intelectual. Um teste simples mostrou como estimular essa busca.
And we know from this research that you just mentioned, from Carol Dweck in California, who's done many, many studies now, on how people think about intelligence and how the different attitudes towards intelligence change the way they change the level of ambition and their level of success. So here's the study. She took 400 seventh graders and she gave them puzzles, all the same puzzles, and they were actually very easy puzzles. And then she divided the seventh graders into two groups. And to one group she said, you guys did really well at these puzzles. And the reason is that you were born with a certain amount of intelligence, an innate amount of intelligence. Intelligence is this stuff that you've got inside you. And you should feel great. You're smart. This proves you're smart. And isn't that a good feeling? And to the other group she said, you guys did really well at these puzzles. But the reason you did really well is that you work hard. Intelligence is not something you're born with. Intelligence is something you earn through hard work over time. It's skills that you develop in school and on the playground and with your parents at home. And then she asked all the seventh graders, what kind of puzzles do you want to do now? Do you want to do the same level of puzzles, or would you like to try something harder? And this is the key thing. The people who were taught that intelligence is just something that you're born with and you have a certain amount of it, they didn't want to try harder. They wanted to do the same level of puzzles. The people who were told that the key to intelligence is working harder, is building these skills, almost all of them wanted to try harder puzzles.
E essa eterna ginástica mental não se limita à infância. O cérebro permanece maleável a vida toda e precisa de exercício para não enferrujar.
Childhood is key, and that's when the brain is, most formative and things like that. But the brain never stops adapting to experience. So whether you like it or not, when you're 30, 40, 50, 60, your brain is still responding to your experience. You're not just a student when you're a child, you're really a student of life throughout your entire life.
Os motoristas de táxi de Londres são uma prova viva disso. De tanto ter que se localizar nos intrincados labirintos da cidade, acabaram desenvolvendo uma espécie de GPS no cérebro.
So there was a neurologist in London who wanted to see what that looked like in brain scans, and she looked at taxi drivers, because taxi drivers have this extraordinary ability to have a map inside their head. It's like a GPS inside their head, right? So, and we all have that GPS. It's called the posterior hippocampus. It's the piece of your brain that helps you form a map of where you are in the world. But of course, certain people have better skills at knowing where they are, a certain better sense of direction. Is this a genetic thing, or is this something that you can actually build in skills? So she looked at taxi drivers' brains, and what she found was amazing. The experienced taxi drivers, the best taxi drivers, the people who knew the most, actually had bigger parts of their brain compared to the less experienced taxi drivers. And you can see over time that taxi drivers have bigger posterior hippocampi than non-taxi drivers because they've been working at it, and that the people who work at it longer, their brains keep changing. And you can look at, there's all sorts of studies about this, brain plasticity. You can see violin players who get better and better, Braille readers, people who are responding to, who are doing exercises, brain exercises as a result of having strokes. You can look inside their brains and you can see over time their brain is changing according to the demands that they're making on themselves.
Mas para largar na frente é preciso contar com boas escolas. Países com um sistema educacional precário, como o Brasil, saem em desvantagem nessa corrida. O jeito é correr atrás do prejuízo e compensar com criatividade o que a escola não oferece.
Hoje, o nosso programa investiga se existem bases genéticas para a genialidade. Aqui em Washington, a psicóloga Rena Subotnick examina as várias dimensões da mente do gênio. É uma questão que intriga os cientistas. O que produz gênios? É a capacidade que vem nos nossos genes ou é resultado de muito trabalho? Até hoje, ninguém sabe com certeza a origem de um desempenho extraordinário. Para a ciência, ser gênio vai além de ser mais inteligente do que a média ou ser capaz de fazer algo que ninguém faz. Há quase uma década, a doutora Rena Subotnick ajuda a definir as políticas educacionais aplicadas a crianças prodígio na Associação Americana de Psicologia. O primeiro passo para ela é diferenciar os verdadeiros gênios daqueles que conseguem fazer muito, mas apenas em um campo de conhecimento.
A genius is a person that's usually attributed to an adult who not only changes his or her own field in some way, but also influences other fields. Mozart would have been a genius because he not only transformed the world of music, but also influenced the aesthetics of writing and theater, etc.
He was doing that at a very early age.
Right. We have to be specific about what words mean.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we don't need to be in everyday language. We can say, oh, you know, my son's a genius, he did such and such. But as a scientist, we try to use language that's defined. And in the psychological science literature, we would say a genius is someone who is an adult whose work influences not only their own field, but also that of others. We would say eminent for someone who has changed their field and the way people look at it and the techniques and the attitudes and the productivity of a field. So those people are certainly eminent. In terms of genius, it would be a question of how much influence they had on other domains. So with Albert Einstein, for example, the concepts of time that he developed and alternative universes happening at the same time was burgeoning for science fiction, for philosophy. I mean, it had a huge impact on the arts also. So he's a prototypical genius.
If we open this box
Yeah.
of the genius mind, what is inside?
What we're really finding is most important is special ability. So not necessarily IQ, which is generic, we call it G, but special ability. So for example, the basic ability in dance would be physical memory. And memory is very important in IQ, but this is physical memory. IQ doesn't measure physical memory. And mathematicians say that the innate ability that a mathematician needs is something called mathematical cast of mind, which is a view of the world mathematically.
Abstractly.
Yeah, just everything is numbers and concepts and patterns. That's very unique to mathematical people. And if you have that, you can build on it and potentially be an eminent mathematician.
But how do you go from there, from the eminence in the field to the genius in the field, like Einstein?
Well, there's the element of creativity. You have to have confidence to take risks. It's very difficult, for example, once you're in a club, you know, of eminent people, to say everything you've been doing is wrong and I have a different theory.
Oh, he challenged what was there.
He was challenged with what was there, which is incredibly threatening. So there's this psychological dimension of once you become famous in your field, to take it to the next level or even to reach out to other areas takes a certain amount of psychological strength and confidence.
Herança genética ou esforço pessoal, seja qual for a origem da genialidade, a doutora Subotnik alerta. Os professores precisam aprender a reconhecer os talentos na hora certa. É uma tarefa difícil, principalmente em escolas onde é mais fácil privilegiar desempenho esportivo do que desempenho mental.
Who teaches a genius?
Genius,
they don't get, they don't get much special help, do they?
I'm uncomfortable using the word genius in this case, but in preparing really amazingly talented, eminent people, the first stage of a teacher is to expose children to really interesting things and to monitor their response to those things. And if they are really eager and excited, reinforce that. And if they seem like they're ready to persist, then you give them intensely rigorous studies in the skills, the content, the attitudes, the values that are associated with that, whether it's sports or it's science or it's performing arts.
If you are a genius in biology, in math, ain't nobody there to bring you up.
That's something that's very perplexing to me. Why we value and are comfortable saying that someone's an elite athlete, but why we're not comfortable saying somebody's an elite student. Now, once you get to university, it's less of a problem. I mean, people are much more prepared to recognize extraordinary students. But I can only speak for the United States. There is an anti-elitist concern, and it's about children who are very high performing.
An anti-feeling policy towards those who are the most capable?
It's more that benign neglect, that they don't need, they'll make it on their own. Because
they're so smart that they will take care of themselves.
They're so smart and so motivated that they'll make it on their own. And certainly they could, but they could also, and I've seen this, be incredibly disruptive. So it is different. We do value athletes in school. You know, they're our heroes. And there's nothing wrong with that as far as I'm concerned. I mean, they work really hard and they're beautiful to watch. I just would like to see the same kind of admiration for children who have these abilities.
Why is that the prevailing view or attitude? Why is it that the most gifted, the most capable, are left to their own devices?
I have two theories. One is that, well, I've talked to school leaders and said, why do you have, you know, a big case of trophies for the sports people and for the musicians, which is a big deal, band and orchestra, but not for your scholars? And he said, because the musicians and the athletes do it for the school, and the students, the academic students, do it for themselves. And the other is that everyone has to go to school. And so, you know, everyone gets affected by who's a better student than another, whereas athletes and musicians, not everyone does that. So there's a role for the audience or a viewer or something. But part of it is our responsibility to help children maneuver in these environments, and also always being open to late bloomers, because they do happen.
What is a late bloomer? Somebody who shows promise at 15 or at 30?
Either one, because an important point I want to make is that different domains, you know, a domain is like a subject or a discipline or whatever. So like music or sport or whatever. They have trajectories from when they start, when they peak, and when they end. And so you can see it much more clearly in sport and music. So sport, there are certain sports that you specialize very young. Gymnastics and diving are good examples. And so if you don't get a special teacher that trains you in a particular way to be competitive at a young age, you miss your shot. In music, you see the same thing. Violin, age 4, start, and it's, you know, you get an international career at age 11. You know, that's just the way it is in classical music, and the wind instrument starts later because the person's body is just not developed. Right. And then the singers are later. And in academics, maths, you can see very early. Many other subjects, just, they don't learn about it, or they're not exposed to it till they're adults.
Do you believe the saying that the work of genius is hugely, 99%, work, dedication, and just gift is a minimal part of it?
Maybe it's 5%, but it's necessary. That's the point. Without it, you could work forever. And Howard Gardner made this point in a wonderful article. He's a psychologist, but also plays the piano seriously. Mm-hmm. He said, I could never be Arthur Rubinstein, you know, even though I'd love to be, and I practice seriously every day.
But there's not, the gift is not there.
The gift is not there.
Nosso programa chega ao fim, mas continua na internet. Acesse o nosso site e deixe as suas contribuições. O endereço é g1.com.br/globonews. Até a semana que vem.